The sun was shining brightly over the city. But inside the glass walls of one of the tallest office buildings, the atmosphere was anything but bright. The headquarters of one of the most successful companies in the country was buzzing with activity. Employees rushed back and forth carrying folders and typing on their laptops, trying to keep up with the demands of a CEO who had earned a reputation for being strict, ambitious, and ruthless. She had worked her way up from a small office with just a handful of employees to running a multi-million-dollar company, and everyone knew she expected perfection at all times. On that particular morning, the CEO was holding a special meeting in the top-floor conference room. The air was tense as the employees gathered, knowing that when she walked into a room, she commanded attention without saying a word. Her presence was magnetic and intimidating at the same time. People straightened their backs and tried to appear confident, though many were nervous. She had a sharp look in her eyes that could make even the most experienced manager feel like a beginner. The meeting was not just any regular company meeting. Today she had invited a veteran, a man who had served his country with honor. He had recently been hired as a consultant for the company, tasked with helping them improve efficiency and solve some long-standing operational problems. The veteran carried himself with a quiet strength. He was not flashy, but there was a calm confidence about him that made people notice him. His uniform was no longer worn, but the discipline and focus he had learned in the military showed in every step he took and every word he spoke. As he entered the conference room, the CEO's eyes lit up with curiosity and perhaps a hint of mischief. She had heard stories about his achievements in the military, and had also heard how some people thought he was overly confident. To her, this was the perfect opportunity to test him, to see if he could be shaken or if he would fold under pressure. She was known for enjoying these little games, using them to remind people who was really in control. The veteran walked to the front of the room and greeted the CEO with a firm handshake. She smiled politely, but there was a sharpness in her tone when she spoke. "I've heard a lot about you," she said, her voice calm but edged with challenge. "I'm curious to see if you really live up to all the stories. Some of our tasks here are very complex, and I'm not sure you're ready for them." Her words were polite on the surface, but the meaning was clear. She was questioning his ability and trying to provoke a reaction. The veteran nodded slowly, meeting her gaze without flinching. "I've faced many challenges before," he said quietly, "and I always try to give my best. No matter the situation." There was no arrogance in his voice, only determination and calm confidence. The CEO's lips curved into a small, almost imperceptible smile. She decided to take it a step further. "Let's make this interesting," she said. She outlined a task that was difficult, one that would push even experienced employees to their limits. "If you can complete this task successfully within the next week," she said, her eyes glinting with amusement, "I will acknowledge your value here. I will admit that you are more capable than I expected." Her tone was light. But the challenge was clearly meant to test him, and she secretly planned to make the task almost impossible by creating subtle obstacles behind the scenes. The veteran listened carefully, taking in every detail. He did not react to her challenge with anger or defensiveness. Instead, he simply nodded, showing that he accepted it. "I will do my best," he said, his voice steady. "I don't need recognition or praise. I just want to do the job well." There was a quiet power in his words, and it did not go unnoticed by some of the employees who were watching the exchange. They could see the stark contrast between the CEO's arrogance and the veteran's calm. Professionalism. As the meeting progressed, the CEO continued to push him, asking questions that were meant to test his knowledge, his patience, and his ability to think on his feet. She deliberately added tricky scenarios, hoping to catch him off guard. But the veteran responded with clear, logical answers, demonstrating not only his experience, but also his ability to stay composed under pressure. Each time she tried to provoke him, he remained calm, never showing frustration or anger. Some of the employees began to whisper among themselves. They were starting to realize that the veteran was not just another consultant. He had a presence, a steady confidence that made people feel reassured, even in stressful situations. And they began to notice something else. The CEO was not used to being challenged in this way. Her smile was still there, but there was a flicker of surprise in her eyes. She was encountering someone who would not be easily intimidated. Someone who had the skill and the composure to face her game's head-on by the end of the meeting. The challenge had been fully laid out, and the veteran had accepted it without hesitation. The CEO's plan to unsettle him had not worked, and she felt a mix of frustration and intrigue. This was going to be more interesting than she had anticipated. She watched as he left the room, carrying himself with quiet confidence. She realized that she might have underestimated him. The seed of a serious competition had been planted, one that would test not only the veteran's skills, but also the CEO's sense of control and superiority. Later that day, the veteran returned to his temporary office, a small space near the operations floor. He set his briefcase down and took a deep breath. He knew the task ahead would not be easy. There were countless details to review, data to analyze, and strategies to plan. But he also knew that he was capable, and he understood that the best approach was not to rush or react impulsively, but to methodically work through each challenge as it came. As he opened his laptop and began reviewing the materials, he thought about the people who would be affected by this project. He was not just doing this for himself, but also for the employees who depended on the success of the company and for the clients who trusted its operations. His motivation was not pride or ego. It was a sense of responsibility and integrity. He knew that if he succeeded, it would not only prove his abilities, but it could also demonstrate that fairness and diligence were more powerful than arrogance and cruelty. Meanwhile, the CEO returned to her office, a glass-walled room overlooking the city skyline. She sat at her desk and stared out at the view, trying to anticipate how the veteran would approach the challenge. She was used to being in control, and it was a strange feeling for her to realize that she did not yet know how this situation would unfold. For the first time in a long while, she felt the thrill of uncertainty. It was a challenge not just for the veteran, but for her own pride and authority. The day passed with a mixture of tension and anticipation. Employees moved carefully, aware that the upcoming week would be critical. The veteran continued to prepare quietly, reviewing information and planning his steps. He did not complain about the difficulty of the task, nor did he show any fear of failure. His focus was entirely on doing the work thoroughly and correctly. By evening, the city lights began to twinkle outside the office windows, but inside, the building was still alive with activity. The CEO remained at her desk, thinking about the bet she had made and how she would respond if he succeeded. She was confident, yet there was a new awareness of the possibility that things might not go exactly as she planned. It was a moment of reflection that few people ever saw in her, a brief glimpse of vulnerability beneath her usual confident exterior. As the night deepened, the veteran finally closed his laptop and looked around his small office. He was ready to rest, but his mind was still focused on the challenge ahead. He knew that success would require careful planning, patience, and steady effort, and he was ready to give it everything he had. The week ahead promised to be difficult, but he was determined to meet the challenge with honor, skill, and unwavering dedication. The first day had set the stage. The CEO's cruel bet was in motion, but the veteran had accepted it without fear. The tension was palpable, and both knew that the coming days would test them in ways they could not yet imagine. One thing was clear: neither of them would be the same by the end of this week. The story of pride, challenge, and determination was just beginning, and the outcome was far from certain. The next morning, the veteran arrived at the office early, long before most of the employees had begun their day. He preferred to work in quiet hours, when he could focus without distractions. He carried a small notebook, a pen, and a determination that had been ingrained in him over years of service. Every detail mattered to him, and he knew that the challenge ahead would require careful planning, patience, and unwavering attention. He began by reviewing the task that the CEO had laid out the day before. On paper, it seemed almost impossible, a project so complicated that many would have given up before even starting. But he did not think about the difficulty. Instead, he thought about the steps needed to accomplish it. He broke the problem down into smaller parts, identifying the areas that required immediate attention and the areas that could be addressed later. By organizing the task in this way, he created a roadmap for success. Meanwhile, the CEO arrived at the office, expecting to find him struggling. She walked through the corridors with her usual confidence, greeting a few employees as she passed. Though most of them avoided eye contact, sensing her mood, she had arranged for several small obstacles to be introduced to make the task more challenging. Files were misplaced, reports were delayed, and some systems were temporarily disrupted. She thought she had created the perfect scenario for him to fail, but when she checked on him in his office, she found him calm and focused. He had already noticed the discrepancies and was adapting to them. He did not complain, he did not show frustration, and he did not seek excuses. Instead, he adjusted his plans and continued working, solving problems methodically and efficiently. The CEO watched him through the glass walls, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. Her plan to unsettle him was failing. Throughout the day, the veteran moved from one department to another, gathering information, speaking with employees, checking the systems involved in the project. He listened carefully, asking questions that were precise and insightful. He showed respect to everyone he interacted with, treating them as partners rather than subordinates. His presence had a calming effect on some employees who were feeling the stress of the CEO's challenge, and even those who were usually indifferent began to pay attention to his methods. The CEO could not hide her frustration. She had expected him to struggle, to show weakness or impatience, but instead, he demonstrated competence and composure. She began to realize that she had underestimated him. His military background gave him an advantage in organization, discipline, and resilience. But it was his character, his quiet determination, that truly set him apart. By midday, the veteran had identified several key issues that could derail the project if left unresolved. He worked quickly but carefully, implementing solutions one step at a time. He also communicated with the employees involved, guiding them without taking over, ensuring that the team felt ownership of the work. Slowly, progress began to show. The project, once chaotic and overwhelming, started to take shape under his steady hands. The CEO from her office continued to monitor him. She had underestimated the veteran's ability to think ahead and adapt. Every obstacle she had planted was overcome, often in ways that she had not anticipated. She felt a mixture of irritation and fascination. The challenge was no longer about seeing if he would fail. It was about whether he could succeed despite the difficulties she had created. And he was proving that he could. As the afternoon wore on, tension in the office grew. Employees whispered to each other about the progress he was making. Some admired his calm efficiency, while others were simply curious to see how the CEO would respond. It became clear that the veteran's approach was not just effective, it was inspiring. His patience, attention to detail, and willingness to take responsibility for the outcome set a tone that had been missing in the office for years. Around mid-afternoon, a particularly difficult problem arose. A critical system had malfunctioned, threatening to undo hours of work. The CEO, observing from her office, expected him to panic or to make a mistake. Instead, he remained composed. He analyzed the situation carefully, identified the source of the problem, implemented a solution that minimized disruption. His ability to remain calm under pressure was remarkable, and even the CEO could not hide a sense of grudging respect by late afternoon. The veteran began to see the results of his efforts. Reports were organized, systems were functioning, and the team had a clear understanding of their responsibilities. The task, once daunting and seemingly impossible, was becoming manageable. He paused for a moment to review his progress and consider the next steps. There was still much work to do, but he had established a strong foundation that would carry through the rest of the challenge. The CEO, now more than ever, realized that her initial assumptions about him were incorrect. She had expected arrogance, impatience, and mistakes. Instead, she saw humility, focus, and skill. Her usual confidence was shaken slightly, replaced by a growing curiosity about how far he could go. She decided to observe quietly rather than interfere further, wanting to see the outcome without influencing it. There was a new tension in the air, when it came from the realization that this challenge was not going according to her expectations. As evening approached, the office began to quiet down. Many employees had left, but the veteran stayed behind, reviewing his work and making notes for the next day. He understood that success would not come from rushing or shortcuts. It required diligence, foresight, and steady effort. He was willing to invest the time and energy needed to achieve a complete and thorough solution. The CEO finally returned to her office after a long day, still observing from a distance. She reflected on the veteran's performance and the unexpected effectiveness of his approach. She'd assumed that she could manipulate the situation. She had learned something important. True skill and character could not be easily shaken or controlled. It was a lesson she did not fully expect. It left her both intrigued and unsettled. The veteran left the office later that night. Walking through the quiet city streets, he carried a sense of purpose and calm satisfaction, knowing that he had made significant progress. He also understood that the days ahead would present further challenges, and he was ready to face them with the same determination and focus. Back at the office, the CEO sat in her glass-walled room, reflecting on the day. She realized that the challenge she had issued was revealing not only the veteran's strengths, but also the limits of her own assumptions and control. She had entered this situation expecting to assert dominance, but she found herself confronted with skill, integrity, and composure that she had not anticipated. It was a rare and humbling experience for her. The first day of the challenge had ended, but it had set the tone for the days to come. The veteran had shown that obstacles could be overcome with planning, patience, and steady effort. The CEO had seen that her attempts to manipulate the situation were not always effective. The office, once filled with tension and uncertainty, now carried a sense of anticipation and respect for the unfolding events. As the night deepened, both the CEO and the veteran knew that the week ahead would be demanding. Each day would bring new tests, new obstacles, and new lessons. But for the veteran, the focus remained clear. Work with integrity, overcome challenges thoughtfully, and prove that skill and character matter more than arrogance or manipulation. For the CEO, the day had begun to shift her understanding of power, control, and the unexpected ways in which people can rise to a challenge. Thus, the second day concluded with both of them aware that the coming days would not only test their abilities, but also reveal the true measure of patience, resilience, and character. The veteran's journey was only beginning, and the office, once ruled by hierarchy and expectation, was now witnessing the rise of steady determination against calculated cruelty. The stage was set, the challenge was underway, and the story was moving forward, one careful, purposeful step at a time. The morning sun filled the office with a warm glow, but inside, the atmosphere was tense. The veteran arrived early again, his mind already focused on the challenges ahead. Yesterday had been difficult, but he had made progress. Today, the task would become even more demanding. The CEO, watching from her glass-walled office, was already plotting the next series of obstacles. She had realized that the veteran was more capable than she had anticipated. She wanted to see how far he could be pushed. The veteran opened his notebook and reviewed the work from the previous day. He methodically checked every detail, making sure that no errors had slipped through. He understood that success was built on careful preparation and constant vigilance. He began to plan the day step by step, prioritizing the tasks that would have the biggest impact on completing the project. His approach was calm, deliberate, and precise. Employees passing by noticed him reviewing documents and diagrams with deep concentration. Some whispered quietly to each other about his work ethic and his ability to remain composed under pressure. There was a sense of quiet admiration among those who had witnessed the previous day's progress. It was becoming clear that this veteran was not just competent. He was extraordinary in his ability to handle stress, adapt to challenges, and keep moving forward. Meanwhile, the CEO convened a quick meeting with her team to discuss how she could complicate the veteran's efforts further. She ordered minor disruptions, system delays, missing files, and confusing instructions. She expected him to falter, to become frustrated, or to make a mistake that would allow her to regain control of the situation. She thought she had accounted for every angle, but she underestimated his ability to anticipate and adapt. By mid-morning, The veteran had already identified several of the subtle obstacles she had introduced. He adjusted his plans without drawing attention, finding alternative solutions to problems before they could slow him down. His calm demeanor made it seem effortless, but behind the quiet exterior he was working tirelessly, mentally calculating each step and preparing for contingencies. Each small victory built momentum and confidence, not only for him but also for the team watching him. The CEO, observing from above, began to feel an unfamiliar tension. Every time she thought she had caught him off guard, he adapted seamlessly. His composure was unwavering, and his skill was undeniable. She had expected resistance, confusion, or panic, but she found none. Instead, he worked with efficiency and clarity that challenged her assumptions about control and authority. By noon, a particularly complex problem emerged. A critical report needed data from several departments. But one of the files had been intentionally delayed as part of the CEO's plan. Most people would have been frustrated or disorganized. But the veteran calmly contacted the necessary team members, asked precise questions, and gathered the required information without causing conflict. He streamlined the process and created a clear workflow that allowed him to continue without interruption. His ability to manage both tasks and people simultaneously impressed even those who had initially doubted him. The CEO watched silently, her confidence beginning to waver. She had expected him to fail, but instead he was succeeding, despite the challenges she had introduced. It was a difficult feeling for someone used to being in complete control. Her smirk was fading, replaced by a mix of frustration and reluctant curiosity. She began to realize that the challenge was revealing not only his abilities, but also her own limitations in manipulating others. In the afternoon, the veteran moved on to a critical analysis that required both technical skill and creative thinking. He examined the data, looked for patterns, and tested different solutions. His approach was systematic, yet flexible. He remained focused on the ultimate goal, never allowing frustration or doubt to influence his judgment. Employees who observed him were struck by his ability to remain calm under pressure, and they began to see the value of steady, thoughtful action over hurried, impulsive work. As the day progressed, the CEO became more impatient. She increased the pressure, introducing additional complications and asking pointed questions in an attempt to disrupt his focus. She tried to provoke him publicly, hoping he would show signs of irritation or uncertainty. But the veteran remained composed. He responded calmly and respectfully, addressing every question logically and thoroughly. He demonstrated not only technical skill, but also emotional intelligence, managing both the work and the reactions of those around him. By late afternoon, the project had taken shape in ways that surprised even the veteran. He had solved problems that seemed insurmountable, found efficiencies that had eluded others, and brought the team together in a coordinated effort. The office, once chaotic and uncertain, now operated with a quiet sense of purpose under his guidance. His leadership was not imposed but earned through example. Those around him responded naturally to his steady influence. The CEO, observing the results, could no longer deny his effectiveness. Every attempt to undermine him had been countered with skill and composure. She felt a mixture of irritation and admiration. The challenge she had issued was no longer a simple test of his ability. It had become a lesson in humility and observation for herself. She had underestimated the power of steady determination and the impact of treating others with respect and fairness. As evening approached, the veteran paused to reflect on the progress of the day. He had made significant strides, but he knew that the challenge was far from over. There were still obstacles ahead, more problems to solve, and more details to manage. He planned the next steps carefully, ensuring that the foundation he had built would support the remaining work. He was not focused on winning a bet or gaining recognition. His motivation was doing the task correctly, with integrity and thoroughness. The CEO left the office later, her thoughts occupied with the events of the day. She reflected on her assumptions, her methods, and her expectations. She realized that trying to manipulate someone through cruelty and arrogance could not match the power of competence, patience, and ethical action. For the first time, she considered that her approach might need reevaluation. The tension she had intended to create had turned inward, prompting self-reflection she had not anticipated. Outside, the city lights began to glow, and the veteran walked home at a steady pace. His mind remained engaged with the project, but there was also a sense of satisfaction in knowing that progress had been made. He understood that the next day would bring new challenges, but he was prepared. He had proven to himself and others that obstacles could be overcome with focus, skill, and persistence. Back in the office, the CEO stayed behind, reviewing her own actions and decisions. She understood that the coming days would test both her and the veteran further. She felt the pressure of the unfolding situation, aware that her usual tactics might not yield the desired results. The challenge had shifted from a simple test of his abilities to a complex interplay of skill, patience, and strategy. The third day had revealed more than the CEO had expected. The veteran's calm, efficiency, problem-solving abilities, and leadership had transformed the office atmosphere. Employees were no longer tense or fearful. They were motivated, inspired by someone who led by example rather than authority. The CEO had learned that manipulation and cruelty were not always effective, and that true competence could not be shaken by artificial obstacles as night fell. Both the CEO and the veteran knew that the days ahead would be critical. Each challenge would bring new tests, and the outcomes would continue to shape perceptions, relationships, and respect within the office. The story of the challenge was unfolding, and it was clear that neither of them would remain unchanged. The veteran's journey of integrity, resilience, and skill continued, and the CEO's understanding of control and humility was being tested in ways she had never anticipated. The office, once ruled by hierarchy and fear, was slowly transforming into a space of respect, focus, and collaboration. The veteran's steady presence and unwavering commitment were leaving a mark on everyone who witnessed it. The third day concluded with the realization that the real test was not just the completion of the task, but the demonstration of character, perseverance, and leadership under pressure. The stage was set for the next phase, where the true consequences of actions and decisions would begin to unfold. The next morning, the office was filled with a sense of quiet anticipation. The veteran arrived early as usual, carrying a small bag with his notebook, pens, and other essentials. He had spent the previous night reviewing his progress and preparing strategies for the day ahead. He understood that every hour would be critical and that maintaining focus, calm, and precision would be key to completing the challenge successfully. The CEO, on the other hand, was already in her office. Pacing and thinking about the previous day, she realized that her attempts to complicate the project had not slowed him down. Each obstacle she had planted had been overcome with skill, patience, and calm determination. She was frustrated, but a part of her was fascinated. She had never encountered someone who could adapt so effectively to deliberate challenges and remain composed throughout. It was both irritating and impressive. She decided that today she would try something more direct. She called a meeting with her top managers and outlined a plan to increase the pressure on the veteran. Some of the managers hesitated, unsure if this approach was fair, but the CEO insisted, believing that if anyone could be made to fail, it would be him. She wanted to see the moment when his composure cracked. As the veteran began his workday, he noticed small disruptions almost immediately. Files that were supposed to be available were delayed again, and messages were routed incorrectly. Most people would have felt frustration, but he simply adjusted. He created alternative plans, contacted the right people quietly, and continued his work with careful focus. Each time a new problem arose, he solved it systematically, without panic or complaint. It was not just skill that allowed him to succeed. It was a mindset of calm, persistence, and steady problem-solving. By mid-morning, the CEO's plan seemed to be backfiring. Employees who were part of her scheme began to see how easily the veteran adapted. Some whispered among themselves, noting his calm intelligence and the efficiency of his solutions. The more they observed, the more they realized that the veteran's leadership came naturally, not from authority or intimidation. The CEO, seeing this, felt her frustration grow. She had expected the veteran to falter, to make mistakes that would highlight her control, but instead, he had turned the situation to his advantage. A major turning point occurred just before lunch. A critical system, one that the CEO had tampered with overnight, began to malfunction. It was designed to be confusing and disruptive. Many employees froze, unsure of what to do. The veteran, however, calmly assessed the situation. He quickly gathered the necessary information, analyzed the problem, and implemented a solution that restored functionality with minimal disruption. He even anticipated potential follow-up issues and prepared solutions for them. By the time the CEO checked in, the system was fully operational and the employees were working efficiently once again. Her frustration was growing, but so was her realization that he was extraordinary. Word of his composure and skill began to spread quietly throughout the office. Employees who had initially doubted him now watched with respect. They noticed the difference between his approach and the CEO's. He solved problems, inspired cooperation, and treated people with fairness and patience. In contrast, the CEO relied on intimidation, manipulation, and pressure. The contrast was stark, and it did not go unnoticed. Around mid-afternoon, the CEO decided to escalate the situation. She made a call to a regulatory authority, intending to pressure the veteran indirectly by bringing attention to his methods and creating a formal review. She assumed this would disrupt his focus and give her leverage. What she did not anticipate was that her own actions were being scrutinized as well. There had been prior concerns about some of her practices, and the sudden attention she brought inadvertently triggered an investigation into her own conduct. The veteran, focused on the task at hand, remained unaffected. He continued to organize data, coordinate with employees, and implement solutions, unaware that the CEO's escalation was causing internal alarms elsewhere. His calm, methodical approach allowed him to stay ahead of the project's needs, and he maintained clear communication with his team, ensuring everyone was aligned and confident. By late afternoon, the tension in the office had reached a peak. The CEO was monitoring both the veteran and the unfolding investigation. Employees had begun to notice changes, whispers about accountability, questions about transparency, and the growing realization that her actions could have consequences beyond their immediate workplace. The veteran, however, remained focused entirely on completing the task. He had no desire for recognition, only the satisfaction of doing the job correctly and efficiently. The turning point came unexpectedly. An official from the authority arrived at the office accompanied by several colleagues. They requested a meeting with the CEO regarding recent irregularities that had come to light. The employees were stunned. They had never seen such a public display involving her. The veteran, still calm and collected, observed the scene but continued his work, aware that the investigation did not concern him. The CEO was momentarily speechless. She had intended to create pressure on the veteran, but the situation had reversed. Now, she was facing scrutiny, and her schemes to complicate his task were overshadowed by the attention on her own conduct. The authority officials began asking questions, reviewing documents, and taking notes. Her attempts to maintain control were ineffective. She was no longer in the dominant position she had assumed throughout the proceedings. The veteran continued his work quietly, unaffected by the chaos around him. He demonstrated that true focus and integrity cannot be disrupted by external manipulation or intimidation. The employees, observing the contrast between his composure and the CEO's unraveling, gained a new appreciation for his character. They realized that leadership was not about fear or manipulation, but about competence, calm, and fairness. By evening, the CEO's situation had worsened. The investigation revealed discrepancies and questionable actions linked to her attempts to interfere with the project. She was forced to answer questions, provide explanations, and face the consequences of her own choices. The contrast between her actions and the veteran's steady professionalism could not have been clearer. Employees quietly acknowledged the shift in the office dynamic. Respect had moved toward the veteran, and the CEO's authority was no longer unquestioned. The veteran, as always, remained calm. He had completed his work for the day, ensuring that the project was on track and that his team had clear direction for the following day. He had not sought recognition or advantage from the unfolding events. His focus remained on the task and the people he worked with, demonstrating that integrity and diligence are their own rewards. As the office emptied, the veteran packed his belongings and prepared to leave. He walked through the hallways, exchanging quiet nods with employees who had watched him navigate the day with skill and composure. Their respect and admiration were evident in their eyes, reflecting the impact of his quiet, steady leadership. The CEO, meanwhile, stayed behind, facing the reality of the investigation and the unraveling of her carefully constructed plan. She had intended to assert dominance and test the veteran's limits, but instead, she had been exposed, humbled, and forced to confront the consequences of her own actions. The experience was both frustrating and illuminating, showing her that cruelty, arrogance, and manipulation cannot guarantee control. By the time the veteran left the building, the city lights were shining brightly. He walked calmly through the streets, reflecting briefly on the day's challenges. He knew that more obstacles could come, but he was confident in his approach. Focus, patience, and integrity would guide him through any situation. The day had tested him not only technically, but emotionally and mentally. He had succeeded by staying true to his principles. The CEO in her office looked out at the city below. She reflected on her actions, the veteran's performance, and the unexpected consequences of her attempts to manipulate him. For the first time, she considered the power of steady, principled effort over coercion and cruelty. The unfolding events had revealed lessons she had not anticipated, and she knew that her perspective on leadership, control, and respect had shifted dramatically. Thus, the fourth day concluded with the balance of power shifting, respect earned through integrity, and the realization that actions intended to harm others can often rebound on the one who initiates them. The veteran had demonstrated not only skill and resilience, but also the quiet strength of character that cannot be undermined. The CEO faced the consequences of her own choices. The office had witnessed a remarkable demonstration of competence, calm, and ethical leadership. The stage was now set for the final part, where resolution, recognition, and lasting lessons would unfold. The morning after the authority officials had arrived, the office had a different energy. Employees moved with quiet purpose, no longer tense with anticipation or fear. There was a sense that something important had shifted, a new understanding of what leadership and integrity truly meant. The veteran arrived early, as usual, carrying his notebook and reviewing the final stages of the project. He knew today would be critical, and he was ready to see the culmination of all the effort and careful planning he had put in over the past days. The CEO, on the other hand, was still in her office, facing the consequences of her actions. She had spent the night reflecting on what had happened, and for the first time, she felt uncertainty. Her confidence had been shaken by the veteran's calm efficiency and the intervention of the authorities. She had thought herself in control, but she realized that arrogance and manipulation could not guarantee dominance. Her usual certainty had been replaced with a growing awareness of her own vulnerability as the day began. The veteran focused on his final tasks. He coordinated with team members, making sure that every part of the project was aligned, completed, and documented. His attention to detail was meticulous, but it was also practical. He understood that perfection without clarity was meaningless, so he ensured that the team not only completed the work, but also understood it thoroughly. Each step was purposeful, each instruction clear and concise. Employees continued to watch him with admiration. They were no longer just observers. They had become participants in a process that demonstrated the power of integrity, patience, and steady effort. Even those who had been skeptical before were now convinced of his capability and leadership. They began to see the difference between fear-based authority and respect earned through competence and fairness. The office, which had once been dominated by tension and uncertainty, now had a sense of harmony and focus. Around mid-morning, the CEO walked through the office, observing quietly. She noticed the veteran working methodically, guiding employees without taking unnecessary control, and solving problems with calm intelligence. She could see the respect in the eyes of the team, a respect that had not been given lightly. She felt a mix of irritation, humility, and curiosity. She realized that her approach to leadership, which relied on intimidation and manipulation, had been flawed. There was a lesson here that she had not expected to learn, and it was coming from someone she had underestimated. The authority officials had requested that she attend a follow-up meeting. And as she prepared for it, the veteran continued his work without interruption. He did not seek to embarrass or undermine her. His focus remained on completing the task and ensuring that the project was successful. He demonstrated that true competence and integrity are visible in action, not in words or posturing. By maintaining focus on the work and the people around him, he had achieved more than just the completion of a project. He had set an example for everyone in the office. By noon, the project was nearly complete. The veteran reviewed each section carefully, double-checking calculations, confirming that reports were accurate, and ensuring that all team members were on the same page. He communicated clearly and patiently, answering questions and providing guidance without frustration. The office atmosphere was calm and focused, a stark contrast to the tension and fear that had dominated earlier in the week. The CEO returned from her meeting with the authorities, her expression serious. She understood that her actions had consequences, and she faced the situation with a mixture of regret and reflection. She realized that the veteran had not only completed the task successfully, but had also shown the office a form of leadership she had never demonstrated. He had earned respect through action, competence, and integrity. And there was no way for her to dismiss or manipulate that accomplishment by mid-afternoon. The project was officially complete. The veteran gathered the team together to review the final results. Each employee shared their insights and contributions. The veteran acknowledged their efforts, reinforcing the importance of teamwork and shared responsibility. He did not take personal credit for the success. Instead, he highlighted the contributions of everyone involved. His humility and focus on collective achievement further strengthened the respect and admiration of the team. The CEO observed the review. Noting the difference between her usual approach and the veteran's, she saw that his method of guiding, supporting, and empowering others had produced not only results, but also loyalty, motivation, and engagement. She realized that leadership was not about dominance or fear, but about competence, integrity, and the ability to inspire others. The lesson was clear, and it was difficult for her to accept fully, but it was undeniable. As the day drew to a close, the veteran completed his final checks and documented the project thoroughly. He ensured that the team had clear instructions for any follow-up work and confirmed that all systems were functioning correctly. His work was precise, complete, and carefully organized. Employees felt confident that the project was in capable hands, and there was a sense of accomplishment and pride throughout the office. The CEO called a final meeting with the veteran. She acknowledged his work, his leadership, and the integrity he had demonstrated throughout the challenge. She admitted that her assumptions had been incorrect and that his approach had set a standard she had not expected. The veteran accepted her acknowledgement with calm dignity, emphasizing the importance of teamwork, responsibility, and focus on doing the right thing, rather than seeking recognition. In the following days, the office continued to benefit from the veteran's approach. Employees adopted a more collaborative and thoughtful way of working, inspired by his example. The CEO, reflecting on the experience, began to reconsider her own methods and approach to leadership. She realized that control could be earned through respect and competence, rather than imposed through fear and manipulation. The veteran, having completed the project and ensured that everything was in order, prepared to leave the office. He walked through the hallways, exchanging quiet nods and brief words of encouragement with the employees. There was a sense of calm and satisfaction, not from external recognition, but from the knowledge that the work had been done well, and the team had learned important lessons in the process. The CEO watched him leave, understanding that the outcome had changed not only the office dynamics, but also her own perspective. She had been challenged, humbled, and ultimately enlightened by someone who had demonstrated that integrity. Patience and competence are far more powerful than arrogance and manipulation. The lesson was clear. and the impact would be lasting by evening. The office was quiet, and the city outside glowed with lights. The veteran reflected on the week, knowing that the work had been completed successfully, and that he had stayed true to his principles. His focus had always been on doing the right thing, maintaining integrity, and helping others achieve their best. He had faced obstacles, manipulation, and pressure, but a steady approach had prevailed. The CEO in her office also reflected. She had been forced to confront her own assumptions, her own approach to leadership, and the consequences of her actions. She had seen firsthand the power of calm, principled effort, and the respect it earned. The experience had changed her understanding of influence, authority, and leadership in profound ways. Thus, the story concluded with resolution and clarity. The veteran had successfully completed the challenge, earning respect and admiration through competence, integrity, and steady focus. The CEO had faced the consequences of her actions and gained a difficult but valuable lesson in humility and leadership. The office, once tense and uncertain, had been transformed into a space of respect, collaboration, and careful focus. The impact of this week-long challenge would be remembered not for drama or conflict, but for the demonstration of character, perseverance, and ethical leadership. The veteran left the office for the final time. Walking through the quiet streets with a sense of calm satisfaction, he had done his work well, guided others effectively, and maintained his principles throughout. The story of the challenge, the backfiring of cruelty, and the triumph of integrity had reached its natural conclusion, leaving lasting lessons for everyone involved. It was a testament to the power of quiet determination, ethical action, and the human capacity to rise above manipulation and pressure, achieving success not through dominance, but through skill, patience, and integrity.